The sky hung heavy with thick gray clouds, casting a solemn shadow over the national cemetery. Rows upon rows of American flags lined the burial grounds, their fabric rippling softly in the crisp autumn breeze. The rhythmic flapping of the flags was the only sound accompanying the quiet shuffle of mourners taking their seats at the front of the gathering. At the center of it all, a polished wooden casket rested on a platform, draped with the American flag. Sergeant Daniel Reeves had come home for his final rest, a man who had served his country with unwavering dedication, both on the battlefield and in the K-9 unit. Lying beside the coffin, ears drooped and eyes clouded with sorrow, was Max, Daniel's loyal German shepherd. But Max had been more than just a dog. He had been Daniel's partner, his protector, his unwavering shadow through years of service. And now, as Daniel's family sat with tear-streaked faces, Max remained unmoving, his deep brown eyes fixed on the man he had spent a lifetime following. The ceremony unfolded with quiet reverence. A priest stood near the casket, reciting scriptures about honor and sacrifice. Veterans in crisp uniforms sat among the mourners, hands resting over their hearts. Grief hung thick in the air, but so did respect and gratitude. Then came the moment of the 21-gun salute. The first crack of the rifles shattered the silence. Max's ears twitched, his body flinching slightly. The second volley rang out and he let out a soft whimper. By the third shot, he was trembling. Emily Reeves, Daniel's daughter, noticed his distress. She reached out, her voice shaky. "It's okay, buddy," she whispered. I know you miss him." But Max didn't move. Then, as the final shots echoed through the cemetery and the folded American flag was solemnly handed to Emily, Max let out a sharp, heart-wrenching bark. Before anyone could react, he leapt onto the casket. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few veterans instinctively stood, unsure whether to intervene. The priest faltered mid-sentence, his gaze fixed on the scene before him. Max lay atop the casket, pressing his body against the wood as if trying to feel Daniel's presence through it. A low, sorrowful howl escaped his throat, a sound so raw, so full of grief, that it sent shivers through everyone in attendance. Emily clutched the folded flag to her chest, tears streaming down her face. One of Daniel's fellow soldiers, a man named Peterson, stepped forward. "Come on, boy," he coaxed gently. "It's time." But Max wouldn't budge. His golden brown eyes remained locked on the casket, his chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. Then, suddenly, something changed. Max's ears perked, his muscles tensed, his nose twitched wildly, as if catching a familiar scent. Then, with sudden urgency, he nudged the casket with his nose, whining softly at first, then more insistently. Mourners exchanged uneasy glances. "What's he doing?" someone murmured. Emily stepped forward, concern flickering in her tear-filled eyes. "Max," the dog whined again, his front paws scratching at the edge of the casket. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't panicked, it was purposeful, almost knowing. A hush fell over the gathering. The wind had died down. The air felt unnaturally still. Then something incredible happened. A murmur swept through the crowd like a ripple in still water. Whispered voices, shifting glances. Max continued to nudge the casket, his paws scraping against the polished wood. Emily's breath hitched. "Max, come here, buddy." Her voice was barely above a whisper, thick with grief. But Max didn't move. A veteran in uniform, Corporal Sam Peterson, stepped forward, his expression grim yet intrigued. He had served with Daniel and had witnessed firsthand the bond between soldier and K-9. Studying Max closely, he turned to Emily. "These dogs," he murmured, "they have a sixth sense. They can feel things we can't." He hesitated, glancing at the unmoving shepherd. Maybe Max knows something we don't." Silence settled over the gathering. Then suddenly Max whined again and began scratching at the casket. The sound of his claws against the wood sent chills through everyone. His movements were deliberate, not desperate, purposeful. Mourners exchanged uneasy glances. The priest clutched his Bible tighter, and then something changed in the air. A warmth, subtle at first, almost unnoticeable. A presence. The cold that had lingered all morning seemed to lift just slightly, and Max, still pressed against the casket, let out another quiet whimper, this time almost expectant. The cemetery air was unnaturally still. Just moments ago, the wind had rustled the flags, their fabric whispering in the autumn breeze. Now it had vanished entirely. Emily felt it, the shift, the weight of something unseen yet powerful. A tingling sensation pricked her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. She wrapped them around herself, her heart pounding. The priest cleared his throat, preparing to continue the final prayer. Then, the American flag draped over the coffin shifted. It wasn't the wind, there was none. A ripple, a slow, deliberate movement across the surface of the fabric. A collective gasp erupted from the crowd. Max threw his head back and howled. Not a mournful wail this time, but something else. Something different. Something hopeful. Emily's breath caught. Her fingers clenched around the folded flag in her lap. Her pulse pounded against her ribs. Then, in the heavy silence, her phone buzzed. The sound was deafening. Her hands fumbled, nearly dropping the device as she yanked it from her coat pocket. A wave of nausea rolled through her stomach when she saw the screen. Incoming voicemail, Dad. Her finger trembled as she pressed play. A click, a moment of static. Then, his voice. Hey, sweetheart. If you're hearing this, I guess my time's up, Emily gasped, a strangled sob catching in her throat. Silence fell over the cemetery. I just wanted you to know. I love you, and I'll always be with you. And Max, take care of him. If he ever acts strange around my grave, don't be scared. Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. That just means I'm still here. The message ended. Max lowered his head, pressing his nose against Emily's hand. A soft, knowing lick. A comfort. An understanding. No one spoke. No one moved. But in that moment, Emily knew. Daniel Reeves had never really left. She stared at her phone, her hands shaking, her father's words pressing down on her like a tidal wave. That just means I'm still here. Mourners who had once been stiff with grief now stood frozen, absorbing the impossible. Veterans exchanged solemn nods, understanding in a way no one else could. Even the priest, his voice thick with emotion, murmured, "Some bonds never break." Max didn't whimper anymore, didn't scratch at the casket. Instead, he let out a slow breath and pressed his forehead against the wood, still and steady. Emily exhaled shakily, brushing her fingers over the flag in her lap. He knew. Her father had prepared her, in his own way. And Max, he had known too. Warmth settled in her chest, pushing through the cold grip of grief that had held her all morning. She looked up, seeing the same quiet realization in the faces of those gathered. Then, Max lifted his head and turned, meeting Emily's gaze with deep, golden brown eyes. Slowly, deliberately, he stepped forward, closing the space between them. His nose nudged against her palm. His body leaned into her touch. Emily let out a quiet sob and wrapped her arms around him, pressing her forehead against his. "You're staying with me," she whispered. "I promise." As the ceremony neared its end, the honor guard prepared for the final farewell. A soft wind stirred through the cemetery, rustling the leaves of the great oak trees. Then, a sound, faint, almost imperceptible, a whistle. Emily stiffened. It was distant, barely there, but unmistakable. A short, sharp whistle, the same one her father had always used to call Max. Her breath hitched. Her fingers tightened in Max's fur. Max's ears perked. His head tilted slightly. His tail gave a single, slow wag. Emily let out a tearful laugh, lifting her gaze to the sky. The ache in her chest was still there, but for the first time, it wasn't just pain, it was love. It was memory. It was proof. Her father was still here. And, through Max, his loyal companion, his final gift to her, he always would be. The days that followed, the silence in the house was unbearable. Emily moved through it like a ghost, caught between the weight of grief and the lingering warmth her father's message had left behind. Some nights she still expected to hear his voice. Some mornings she caught herself reaching for her phone, thinking, for a split second, that she could still call him. But the one who felt it the most was Max. For days after the funeral, he barely moved from the spot beside her father's chair. He would sit there, head resting on the cushion, waiting, watching, listening. He refused to eat much, hardly responded when Emily called his name. The once alert, energetic German shepherd had become a shadow of himself, just like she had. But then, something changed. One morning, Emily stepped onto the porch expecting to see Max in his usual spot by the chair. He wasn't there. Instead, she found him standing at the edge of the yard, ears perked, nose lifted toward the crisp morning air. His posture was different. He didn't look lost anymore, he looked ready. Emily furrowed her brows. "What is it, boy?" Max turned to her, golden brown eyes shining with something she hadn't seen in weeks. Purpose. And in that moment, she understood. Daniel wouldn't have wanted them to stay stuck in grief. He had spent his life serving others, training dogs like Max to be protectors, companions, lifesavers. And maybe, just maybe, that was what she was meant to do too. For the first time in weeks, Emily felt something other than pain. She felt determined. That very night, she sat at her father's old desk, scrolling through pages of information on K-9 training programs. She read about veterans who had dedicated their lives to working with military dogs, training them for search and rescue, therapy, law enforcement. And the more she read, the more certain she became. Her father had left her something more than just memories. He had left her a calling, and she was going to follow it, a new beginning. A few weeks later, Emily and Max sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the treetops. It was one of those rare, perfect evenings, the kind where the air was just cool enough, where the world felt still but alive. Max lay beside her, his head resting against her knee, his tail sweeping the wooden porch in slow, steady movements. Emily let out a soft sigh, running her fingers through his fur. "We're going to be okay, buddy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We've got work to do." Max let out a small, contented huff. Then something caught Emily's eye. A tiny glow flickered in the air. She stilled. A single firefly hovered in front of them, its light pulsing softly in the dark. It floated near Max for a moment before drifting toward Emily, hovering at eye level, as if watching her. Her breath hitched. Her heart pounded. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the firefly blinked out of sight, disappearing into the night. Max's ears perked. His tail wagged once. Then he let out a happy, familiar bark. Emily felt the tears come, but this time they weren't heavy with sadness. She smiled, tilting her head toward the sky. "I know, Dad," she whispered. "You're still here." Max nudged her hand, and together they stood. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Emily wasn't afraid. She had Max by her side. She had her father's memory guiding her, and she had a future worth stepping into. As the night settled around them, Emily and Max walked down the driveway, toward purpose, toward healing, and toward the unbreakable bond that would never fade. Some bonds are too strong for even death to break. Emily lost her father, but through Max, his love and legacy lived on. Their story is a powerful reminder that love never truly leaves us. It simply finds new ways to stay. If this story touched your heart, imagine all the incredible tales waiting for you here on Jungle Diaries, from heartwarming rescues to incredible acts of loyalty. We bring you the most unforgettable stories of animals and the humans who love them. Subscribe now and be part of our growing community of animal lovers. And don't forget to like, share, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another amazing story, because sometimes the ones we love never really say goodbye.